This is In Depth. It is a tale of Evansville history. It is in many ways a story of the good, the bad, and the ugly, but it is more than this. It is a love story. Its title, Out in Evansville, an LGBTQ plus history of River City. I'm joined tonight by Kelley Coures. We know him as a civic leader, and he is the author of this book. In the prologue, Kelley, it took you about 2 years, you tell me,
about
to put
2
this
years
together. But in the prologue, this jumped out at me. You said, and you were basically comparing society's interpretation to what was going on in Europe in many ways. And you said, destroy the history and you erase the people forever. What were you talking about?
Well, Joseph Goebbels was the propaganda minister in Nazi Germany, and when the German government came up with a solution for European Jewry, they were just going to kill people. Goebbels reminded everyone that simply killing all the Jews wouldn't erase Judaism. He said what you have to do is destroy the synagogues, the Torah scrolls. You have to melt down the Stars of David. You have to get rid of all the artifacts that would trace the history of these people, or some archaeologists will dig one up in 400 years and the whole thing will start again. And so my goal with this book was to capture as best I could the history of LGBTQ plus people in Evansville, Indiana, from the earliest time that I could document Evansville being aware of them to the present day.
And to get this in the galley, you refer to your sources as the elders.
The elders.
Who are they?
Well, I'm an elder now to most people. My husband says I'm grandpa. But I tried to find people who were 10 to 15 years old. I just turned 64. So I tried to find people who were 10 or 15 years older than me that were out and about, that were involved in the community as it was. You know, it was illegal to be gay until 1977 in the state of Indiana. So things had to be done behind the scenes. But I knew that there were bars, there were clubs, there were places people went. So I put the call out through other friends that I have that, hey, if you were around when, for example, Pal's Steakhouse was open, which was the first gay bar in Evansville, if you were around when the Cabaret was operating, if you were, call me. I gave him my phone number, said, call me. And I got about 10 phone calls from people who gave me a rich tapestry. I have all their stories recorded. I have a rich tapestry of a picture of what life was like before I came on the scene in the late 70s. And I can trace back personal stories back into the 50s. And then before that, I had to document things with newspaper files, with court records, with things like that.
As you know, Evansville is a grand old soul city dating back to the early 19th century, and the influence on young people and older people in Evansville dating back to that century, you had to research that. And it kind of jumped out at me that Oscar Wilde appeared to be an influencer worldwide on attitudes toward social behavior.
Well, he was the first international celebrity. You know, it was the 1890s was the Gilded Age, the age of the telephone, the newspaper, telegraph, all of these things. So he was he traveled. He was he was Irish, but he was a British playwright. But his work was very popular in places like Evansville. You know, every high school in America performed The Importance of Being Earnest, or The Portrait of Dorian Gray. His poems were read in every high school until it was discovered that he was a homosexual. He was convicted of gross indecency in a scandalous trial, and the coverage of that in the local newspapers was phenomenal. I couldn't believe how in-depth, so to speak, the newspapers went in covering this story. But what I came away from that with was the attitude of the editors of the newspaper at the time said that, well, anyone who lives like Oscar Wilde should just kill themselves, that his solution would be suicide.
And this was treated as an illness.
Later,
wrongfully so.
Yeah,
but this kind of formed what was coming up into the 20th century. Right. But it could be cured. That almost has unfortunately a familiar ring to it even to this day in certain pockets of society. And it really started taking a forefront as far as discussion in, I believe, the late 1930s.
There was a syndicated columnist, a psychologist, and he would write articles, columns in his psychology column about people who would write to him about this issue. There was a gentleman whose wife was devoted to her friend and paid more attention to her friend than he did to her, and that, you know, that they were lesbians, and, you know, how can I, and he said, well, basically at the end of each of those columns, he said, if you send me 75 cents in a self-addressed envelope, I'll send you a book on how to cure it. It's kind of funny to hear that now, but that was the mode of thought.
We got to be very brief here, Kelley. This led to crimes against people right here in Evansville, and some of the fascinating reads in this book involves people like Andrew Reagan, Jack Burdett, Rudolph Ziemer, and Laura Lubahusen. And those are the reported cases.
Right. Well, those were the cases. What I tried to do in that section of the book was to show that when a gay person was murdered, if the defense of the person who murdered them, even if you had a confession that they murdered, if the defense attorneys would say, well, you know, this person made advances to this other person and that's why they killed him, then the jury would acquit them. The Ziemer murder was the worst case of injustice, I think, in Vanderburgh County history, because you had a solid line. On all these cases, Brad, the police did their job, the prosecutor did their job, all of the law enforcement did their job. It was the jury that used prejudice to acquit these murderers, and there was the whole series. It wasn't until the murder of Laura Lubahusen that the murder of a gay person was treated the same as the murder of a heterosexual person.
We have a picture of you as a child.
Unfortunately, you said the good, bad, the ugly. That's the ugly.
I did not mean that in any way, Kelley, but if we can get that picture up, the impact of your life, and you said just a few minutes ago before we started, you've had a magical life.
And I have, really I have.
And as a child, you had a loving family.
I did. I was a late kid. My mother was in her 30s when she had me, and my mother, my stepfather, they were very political people. They were very worldly people, and it was no surprise to them when I told them. They would say, well, we already knew that.
And this book will be available when?
April 24th. It'll hit your brother's bookstore and Barnes & Noble. It's available for pre-order now, and I hope young people read it. And if you're a 15, 16, 17-year-old person going through a personal crisis, your identity, you can pick this book up and realize, my gosh, there was all this history. I can see myself in this long story in my hometown. That's the reason I wrote it.
All right, Kelley Coures, thank you so much. The book out in Evansville, an LGBTQ plus history of River City. Thanks a lot for joining us tonight. We'll be right back.